Hey there, if you're thinking of buying your first landscape photography camera, or maybe you're thinking of upgrading the camera that you've got, I highly recommend watching this video to the end because I think it's going to really help you make a really great decision and not waste money. The thing that most people focus on when they're buying a landscape photography camera is, well, it's just that really. They're actually focusing on the camera first. And in this episode, I want to try and explain why you might not want to do that and why you might want to do something else instead. So let's talk about the reasons that you might actually want to buy a landscape photography camera in the first place. And I know that's kind of a strange thing to talk about on a landscape photography show. If you're buying the camera purely for landscape photography, then there's a few things that you're probably going to want to think about. You're going to want to think about the weight of that camera body, how many megapixels you might want. So if you do a lot of cropping in or digital zooming in when you edit your photos, then you might want a camera with a bigger number of megapixels just so you've got that starting resolution. Or if you're not planning to print your photos really big and you don't do a lot of cropping in, then maybe a smaller megapixel camera will be perfectly fine. So when I say that people buy cameras in the wrong order or the wrong way round, what I'm really talking about is you're not just buying a camera body, you're really buying into a whole camera ecosystem. So you want to make sure that the ecosystem that you're buying into is actually going to let you create the art that you want to create. So a camera ecosystem obviously includes the camera body itself. It includes obviously the lenses for that camera system or that camera mount. And it even includes things such as the smartphone apps that camera brand or camera manufacturer provide you with to enable you to make better use of the camera if you want to use the app. It also includes the batteries, the memory cards you might need, and even the landscape photo filters you might want to attach to the front of whichever lenses you buy. So all of these things are really important, but in this episode I just want to focus on one thing that's really going to help you buy your next landscape photography camera, and that's to talk about lenses. And obviously lenses are kind of important when you want to take landscape photos, and that's where I think sometimes things are a bit switched around, or we put the cart before the horse. Is that the right expression? We focus purely on the body, and the lenses are kind of an afterthought when we're buying into a new camera system or a new camera body. And obviously you might want to use the camera system that you're buying to do some video work, but in this episode we're just going to really restrict the conversation to talking about landscape photography. So you're going to need at least one lens, maybe a few different lenses when you're buying a landscape photography camera. And a lot of the time, most people, including me in the past, don't really look at what lenses are available, or at least don't think about the exact kinds of things they want to do and what lenses they'll need to let you create that art that you want to create. But really, you want to start with the end in mind, and you want to imagine the kind of art that you want to create. Working back from that, what lenses will you need? And it's not just a simple case of what focal length you want or whether you want a zoom or a prime. So for example, let's say I was thinking about buying my first Nikon camera. I might be looking at something like the Z7 II, the Z8 or Z9, depending on how you want to say it. But even though it's tempting to start comparing the exact specs for each of those cameras, you know, burst frame rate, megapixels, battery life, all of that stuff is important, but it's also important to be able to use the camera out in the field to actually take photos. So in this case, I am actually thinking about switching to Nikon, and obviously all of those three cameras I just mentioned use the same lens mount, so I'd be looking at lenses to fit that lens mount. But it's not just about seeing, what focal lengths fit the mount of the camera system that you want to buy into. It's really thinking a bit more deeply about things. So let's say that when you're doing landscape photography, you don't really walk that far from your car. You just pull up somewhere, take your camera out, maybe put it on a tripod, and you take photos pretty close to your car. Maybe that's because you can't walk very far, or you're not really into walking, or whatever the case might be. In that case, the weight of the lenses that you choose might not be a massive thing to think about when you're buying into a camera system. You're not really carrying the weight of that lens very far. Whereas if you're someone that likes to hike, walk, and really get into nature, then you're going to be walking a long way with those lenses, or that lens. So the weight of that lens is going to play a massive part in your buying decision. Also, when you're thinking about lenses, you're probably going to want to think about focal lengths. And if you're like me, maybe you love those really epic, sweeping, wide-angle photos. Or maybe you like the flexibility of a zoom lens somewhere in the 24 to 70 millimeter range. And if you never really go more than 24 millimeters wide, then you're probably not going to need something like a 16 to 35. Or at the other end of the scale, maybe you love doing telephoto, landscape photography, and really picking out elements of mountain ranges and really being detailed about what you include in the frame. In that case, obviously, you're going to want more of that telephoto focal length range. So that's the first thing, is to really just think about the kind of photography that you really enjoy, or that you want to challenge yourself to do more of in the future, and choose the focal range or focal length ranges that will let you create that kind of art. So once you know what kind of weight you want in the lenses, and once you know the focal lengths that you want to cover, then you should start thinking about manufacturers. Sony, Tamron, Sigma, whether it's first-party lenses or third-party, like Sigma and Tamron. And then start to put together your ideal lens combination to cover the focal lengths that you want and any weight characteristics that you want to factor into that equation. As a concrete example, say you really like to hike long distances and really get out into nature, really get away from people and the road, and just be quiet and still in nature. In that case, you're probably not going to choose big 2.8 aperture lenses that are much heavier. And for landscape photography, you probably don't really need to be taking those big 2.8 aperture lenses around. An f4 lens is going to be smaller and lighter to carry those long distances. So now you know the weight, you know the focal lengths, and you know the aperture that you're probably going to want to use. And I think f4 is a fantastic choice for landscape photography, hiking, just because of the weight savings. And now you can start looking at brands of camera bodies, because you know which lenses for which camera body mount are actually going to be what you want and meet your goals. And you can see how choosing the camera body first is kind of completely backwards to what we should be doing. And I've been guilty of this in the past as well. But there's another aspect that you might want to think about. So I really like using ND filters and doing long exposure, fine art style photography. I just really enjoy that style of photography. Sometimes that means I'm going to need lenses where I can fit some kind of ND filter on the front. I also really like wide angle photography, and one of the things that you've got to look out for is really wide angle, ultra wide angle zoom lenses, or primes even sometimes, have a bulbous front element on the lens, which makes it almost impossible, or actually impossible, to use screw-on filters or filter adapters on the front, because they just bang in to that front glass element. So with that knowledge in mind for myself, that I want to be able to create that style of art, wide angle, ultra wide angle, ND filters, I'm going to need to look at lenses that also are f4 lenses that are light and that can accept filters. And one lens I've really been looking at a lot recently is the Nikon 14 to 30 f4 lens, because even though it's like really wide, 14 millimeters at its widest end, it has an almost flat front element, so I can fit ND filters to it, and that's really going to allow me to achieve that vision of the art that I want to create. So a lot of other manufacturers' lenses, whether that's third-party lenses or Canon lenses, or you know, I'm not going to mention specific brands, but the point is, I know that that's a requirement for me, so I'll need to find which camera systems have lenses that meet that requirement. And the other camera systems that don't have lenses that meet that requirement, basically, I'm not going to be able to choose. And that's perfectly fine, really. As always, let me know your thoughts on this. And until next time, I want to wish you happy landscapes, and I hope you get some amazing images.